CEO of Medicines Australia, which represents the pharmaceutical industry in Australia. Elizabeth, thank you for your time. Appreciate you heading into our studio. Do we need to worry in Australia about the supply of medicines? Are we seeing supply chains being impacted?
So what I can tell you is we are in unprecedented circumstances. There has been huge spikes in demand of medicines, and the global pharmaceutical industry and the pharmaceutical industry in Australia are working round the clock to ensure that the supplies are available here. We have good supplies in Australia, and it is not necessary for people to be hoarding their medicines or stocking up months of supplies.
How widespread has that stockpiling been? Do you expect we will need to see further government restrictions in this space?
We think that the measures that were announced by Minister Hunt recently, so limiting dispensing to usual supply requirements, were absolutely appropriate, making sure that people didn't take too much of medicines that they don't need and that they're not going to use, and to keep them on the shelves. At the moment, I think that the spike in demand is settling down in some areas, but we're watching it very closely. Pharmaceutical companies are looking at their stock holdings, stock in the warehouses, in the wholesalers and on the pharmacy shelves all day, every day, hourly, looking at the changes that are happening.
Where are the majority of our medicines produced? Are there supply chains issues coming from overseas that we need to be aware of?
So this is a global industry and it is a global supply chain. Medicines are manufactured all over the world in multiple countries, and every company has different contingency plans in place that they've already set in place to ensure that they can increase production and meet the demand from every country around the world. So the supplies in Australia are being increased, and they are still coming into the country to replenish the stocks as they are required.
Elizabeth, last year we had a situation where there was a shortage of flu vaccinations at the very beginning when vaccinations were rolled out. I know a lot of Australians are pretty keen to have their flu vaccination this year, so they are in a position not to have to worry about the flu on top of worrying about coronavirus. Are there going to be enough flu vaccinations for everyone who wants to get one this year? I understand they'll be rolled out by the end of this month to GPs and most pharmacies.
So flu vaccinations are demand forecast in the same way that many other things. So in many ways, the spike in flu cases last year would have been very helpful to increase our expectations for this year. So I know that the supplies of flu vaccination have been increased. I know that there are flu vaccinations coming into the country in preparation for the announcements from the government when the flu vaccinations will become available from your GP.
The whole world, as we know, is now hunting for a coronavirus vaccine. Just how far off are we, do you think, from finding it?
Well, vaccination development takes a long time, and there has been a lot of work done to try and truncate the regulatory processes to make them as swift as possible. The global pharmaceutical industry is working collaboratively with government and governments all around the world, with researchers and universities, to try and find this answer as quickly as possible and then get it into production. One of the most important factors is that all of these medicines, whether it is finding a treatment or a prevention or a vaccination for COVID-19, will need to be assessed thoroughly for their safety and effectiveness in actually achieving the goals that we're setting out to achieve. So there is also a regulatory requirement that the evidence is looked at, and as long as those treatments and the vaccinations are safe and effective, then they will come to the Australian population as quickly as possible.
You mentioned we're trying to really reduce the time frame when it comes to that regulatory approach to any new vaccine. What are we talking though? I mean, is it still a 12 to 18 month bet in terms of when we'll actually see one come through? How quickly can that approval happen once we get to that point of finding a vaccine?
So we're seeing around the world already clinical trials, early clinical trials, to see if the vaccines that are being developed that were the first in through the gate are being effective, and we're seeing new technologies being employed to try and deliver new vaccines as well. There is an enormous amount of work going on to ensure that we can be as swift as we can. Some of the vaccine technology is very complicated, so there is an expectation for it to take at least 12 months, but people have been working on this now for a few months. in that time, we will also be looking at treatments. So it may well be that there are some things that can help soften the impact or treat people who are in critical care areas and reduce the time of their symptoms or the impact of the disease on them before we have a vaccination ready for the rest of the population.
Elizabeth De Summer, the CEO of Medicines Australia, appreciate your joining us there. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.